So welcome to the Secure Dynamics TechCast. With me, I have two past guests. Ajit Sancheti, who is the CEO of Preempt, which just got bought by CrowdStrike. Welcome, Ajit.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Ashwin.
Thank you again. And Venki, a recent past guest who is Vice President of IT at Packard Enterprise. Welcome back, Venki.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashwin.
So again, thanks, Venki and Ajit, for suggesting the topic, which is zero trust. I actually went and did a little bit of research on exactly the year zero trust came into existence, and it looks like it was 2010 is when John Kinderberg came up with this. It's been 10 freaking years, right? So talk a little bit about, Ajit, I'll put you on the spot, right? Which is, clearly John still talks about it. Now he's at Palo Alto Networks and still big proponent, but then everybody seems to have zero trust somewhere in their marketing jargon, right? So if you were to look back and what was zero trust 2010, how does it look in 2020? What would be some of the biggest things that you've seen have evolved?
So if you think about where it started, zero trust was almost the next generation SSL VPN. Right? It was an ability for us to get remote workers inside the enterprise in a secure manner and not have to have some of these extra holes or extra access that you didn't really know how to control. So it started there, and then it took another leap when Google did BeyondCorp. And BeyondCorp gave this another impetus because Google said, hey, it doesn't matter if you're remote or if you're internal. We'll just use the same architecture for users regardless of where they are. And that's when BeyondCorp became popular and enterprises started saying, okay, this may be feasible for us. The challenge was Google is a company with unlimited resources, relatively. Yeah. And so it was easy for them to do. But I think for most enterprises that have a lot of legacy applications, legacy infrastructure, legacy ways of getting things done, that approach became a little non-scalable. And that's probably when people started to rethink, okay, what exactly is zero trust for us? Now with the pandemic, that changed again. But let me stop here.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I mean, Ajit, you're living and breathing the dream right now, right? So talk about your experience with zero trust and how you've evolved.
So when we first started talking about zero trust, we didn't call it zero trust at the time in 2014 when we started Preempt, but our initial idea was, hey, enterprises are moving away from the perimeter firewall and they're moving to a very distributed enterprise. And when they do that, identity becomes more important to control. So we started with the focus on identity. And what enterprises did before that was they almost always made decisions based on static policies. And not only did they make it on static policies, the goal was to never interfere with the work of a enterprise worker, right? Mm-hmm. You didn't want to cause friction. And so it was very hard to do anything other than allow or deny. And most of the time you didn't want to deny, so you allowed. And you had to figure out better solutions like UEBA or analytics or something to figure out whether you had a real threat or not. And that didn't really succeed. But what has happened since that 2014 to now is with MFA becoming ubiquitous and other ways of responding to threats in real time, where you can have the users self-verify themselves. That's when identity became very important. And so we started to get more and more pulled into zero trust projects because now you could actually verify in real time. The thing that we were missing and the reason why this CrowdStrike integration makes sense for us is because we focus on the workforce, CrowdStrike focuses on the workload. If you can get both of them together, now you have a very powerful zero trust solutions for enterprises. And that's what we're looking forward to bringing to our customers.
Excellent. Venki, I know you have a lot to add over here from your perspective, both from work from home as well as the access to the cloud. So feel free.
Yeah, so, I look at it in three waves, right? And I think the first wave was the applications went to the cloud, right? Call it SaaS applications, right? The second wave was the infrastructures went to the cloud, call it the Googles and the Amazon. You could call it the private cloud, HPE as a private cloud as well. And the third wave, which started before the pandemic, but somehow got accelerated due to the pandemic, is that employees are in the cloud, right? And the whole concept of zero trust, goes back to the fact that there is not a trusted network, right? It's always verified then trust as opposed to having this perimeter that has the trusted boundary, right? And I think what zero trust, where zero trust manifests itself today, are in three areas, right? And your concept of identity has evolved. So a lot of companies are focused on cloud identity access management. It's not just identities behind your firewall, but it's a hybrid world, right? Your cloud applications plus your on-prem applications. Now, when you got to then secure applications where they are at the distant destination, as opposed to having them route them back behind your firewall. And the area where zero trust has sort of evolved is the area where you have data exfiltrations in the cloud. What happens if you have a download from, say, Salesforce going to Dropbox or Box or OneDrive, and from there you go to Google? I mean, you almost lose visibility and control in this whole chain, right? And I think that's where you need to apply the zero trust framework into data exfiltration in the cloud, applying proper identity authorizations and roles for individuals, I mean, humans as well as non-humans. We call this as bots, right? I mean, whether you have the bots out there, and then you got to have the notion of always verify then trust, and tie that back into your whatever your identity and access management solution. So I think these are three areas, and I think while zero trust started with the VPN, as Ajit said, in today's world, I really feel VPN is dead, right? I mean, we're all remote today. We're all working from home, and I think the future, even the post-pandemic, we envision a world where remote work is going to be the new normal. We will go back to work for maybe collaboration, but there will be a hybrid work style, right? So in that work style, your house or a remote or your edge almost becomes an extension of your office. So I think the whole notion of VPN has to be rethought. I think zero trust has now extended to your house. Your Comcast or AT&T is your security is at the edge, right? And so that's where zero trust comes in. So let me pause there. There's multiple things over there. So
Ajit, go ahead. I know you had some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I get the point, right? We are all trying to verify and trust. The challenge is user experience.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's not zero trust that will be important for enterprise users. It's going to be frictionless zero trust.
Yes.
You have to build in the smarts, the intelligence, the analytics, so that you only challenge when necessary. I'll give you an example, right? If a user is accessing an application on-prem, which is authenticated off of Active Directory, for example, going to the data center, then they do something, they want to go through a federated single sign-on platform or through a cloud single sign-on platform and access an application in the cloud. Now, is your policy, which many enterprises have today, is your policy going to force another MFA for this user when they go to the cloud? That's a friction that you don't need. So if you can tie the identity that's going from one authentication platform to the identity on another authentication platform, and then decide, okay, the risk of the profile of this user has not changed. They're still on the same endpoint. They're going to this new application. I'm not going to challenge them. If you can achieve that level of friction reduction, then you get to that point where when you do challenge them, they know that this is something they got to look for. Otherwise, it'll become a habit and say, oh yeah, this is me. I'll just say yes because I got another authentication. I'm having a beer at the bar and I see an MFA. I'm just going to say yes because I don't remember why I'm getting challenged. So
it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah. No, so I just want to kind of quickly add on to what you said, because I actually had that written up in my list of questions, which is Zero Trust Federation, because I've run into this. I don't know whether you have, like this was about a week ago or something. I got caught up in this capture, right? I was in the middle of a freaking transaction. Everything was going well. And somewhere somebody decided that, hey, he or she needs to be, or I need to be challenged, right? And literally I could not get out of the gel, right? Literally it was like crosswalks and traffic lights and this and that nonsense, right? So to your point, I think, as security builders, right, is the concept of user experience understood and ingrained enough that, to your point, the moment I figure out a way to get out of that, I mean, the first thing I was doing is Googling to see how do I get out of this, right? So as soon as I find a kind of a shortcut out of this, immediately bypassing all the security frameworks. So again, I could not agree more. Your thoughts, Venki?
Sorry, absolutely. I think I agree with both of you, right? I think the role of adaptive access controls, are getting out there. Though it's a little bit early, right? I mean, we've been testing adaptive controls in the last few years, and it's something to get comfortable with because you're doing selective MFA as opposed to all the time, right? From a security standpoint, there'll always be the notion that, hey, you're not doing enough, right? It's something to get comfortable with, but I think that's where I think AI and machine learning can help really shape the risk posture of a user and then apply the appropriate MFA. Right?
Yeah, you can decide, right, whether it's the risk posture of the user, of the device, of the application they're going to, what sensitivity you want. Ultimately, like a CISO told me, I want this to be multi-factor authentication. I don't want this to be multi-fatigue authentication.
I'm never going to forget that.
Yeah, it was just because my users will complain because it's different. Yeah, when it's different, it's a little unsettling for people. So that's why I think it's going to matter that we do it in a way that's frictionless. Now, there are things we're already doing that help that, right? Just authentication and the IAM team in many organizations almost always tended to be under IT. So much of that is now moved under security. Mm-hmm. So because they work closely with security, identity is now becoming a part of the security fabric, which will ultimately lead to more secure networks. So that's going to be one thing that we should expect to see over the coming years.
Okay, so I'm going to ask that last question because you kind of led me to that, which is what changes do you expect, let's say from this 2020, 2025, 5 years from now, right? I know briefly, Venki, you had mentioned OT, but are there other things that we need to account for? Let's say come 2025, we're having the same discussion. It's like, hey, if only we thought of this. So if there's one thing that you would leave the viewers with, what is it that both as security practitioners as well as vendors, you should be thinking of when it comes to zero trust 5 years down the road?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that we are doing is with the H2 office and remote work, right? We're rolling out remote access points from a connectivity standpoint for secure access, right? These are an extension to your office. You have the same SSIDs as you were in the office. So it helps you to securely access that. I think, one area is first to offer that secure connectivity layer. Second phase is that we want to integrate that with a IAM product so that we can then establish the right identity, provide the right authorization framework to sort of go along with it. I think the next piece, I think where I struggle a little bit, maybe an opportunity for startup companies, would be providing like a cloud DLP solution. A lot of DLP tends to be a bad three-letter word, right? You put this agent over there, it scans, it stops, it looks for patterns, looks for keywords. It never works. If you look at CASB achieved the visibility and transparency, but CASB is very difficult when you want to try to put like a reverse proxy and try to filter documents going to the cloud, block documents kind of full. You almost have to, fingerprint multiple terabytes of data with this one, right? So I think those are, the three areas that I would sort of say. The third area is still in development. I think an opportunity for startup companies to sort of innovate there.
I totally agree with you. I think with most organizations and most enterprises, the unified identity is going to become a requirement, and a better understanding of device to human relationship. That's definitely true. DLP has been tough. I think the way you solve the DLP problem is to pick the use cases that matter most. It's just like going back to when you look at 5 years ago, UEBA vendors, the traditional UEBA vendors, they decided that you can get every data source, you bring it in, and now you're going to get a better model. That's not true. The 16th data source, the 17th data source, the incremental value of the 20th data source is much smaller than the first 5. And so if you decide that you can pick the right data sources and you pick the right classifications, you'll probably go far, because now you can be more deterministic about what you're challenging the user about. You can challenge them because you're more likely right than wrong. So if you use those kinds of design principles, you'll be able to get pretty far. It's the 80-20 rule. How much do you want to do to get that last 20%?
Very true. Again, appreciate your time. I know these are strange times that we live in, and again, hopefully the viewers have got a lot out of it. I know I did. I'll never forget the MFA multi-fatigue authentication. I'm subject to that. So again, thanks, Venki, and thanks, Ajit, for your time.
Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.